Good evening, everyone. I'm David Getches. I'm Dean of the Law School here, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the second annual Schultz Lecture. This is a wonderful occasion for us. Let me say a word first about the Schultz Lectureship. It was just 2 years ago that John Schultz, class of 1953, prominent oil and gas attorney, and his wife Cynthia, who are here tonight, endowed this lecture to highlight energy law here at Colorado Law. And this is the second annual lecture. Our first lecturer, Bruce Kramer, is here as well. And we welcome all of you. This is an appropriate place for a lecture on energy law. We have the Natural Resources Law Center, which thank you, Mark Squilacci, director, and Heidi Horton is here, who has done all the arrangements for this, and we thank them. This is also the home of the Center for Energy and Environmental Security, and the university has made energy a primary focus with the founding of an Energy Institute, a Renewable and Sustainable Energy Institute. This is a campus-wide interest. And we see Carl Koval here, Stein Sture, our provost is here, and we welcome him. And Bruce Benson, president of the University of Colorado, and his wife Marcy were here. They were able to greet the Schultzes and our lecturer tonight, Jim Rogers. They had to leave for another event and send their regards to all. As you know, our lecture tonight will be presented by James E. Rogers. He is, of course, CEO of one of the nation's largest utilities, Duke Energy. But as you will see, perhaps through this introduction and perhaps through his remarks, he is neither typical nor predictable. Jim Rogers was a journalist. He attended law school at the University of Kentucky. He was a law clerk for the Supreme Court of Kentucky. He has been in the oil and gas business, and he has been a consumer advocate as Assistant Attorney General for Kentucky, as Deputy General Counsel for FERC. He has been in private practice with the Aiken Gump Law Firm. He's served as Executive Vice President for Interstate Pipelines for Enron, and CEO of three companies, if you count the mergers, I believe. So his knowledge of energy is comprehensive, long-standing, and diverse. Newsweek this year named Rogers to its global elite list of 50 most powerful people in the world, saying, quote, "The CEO of Duke Energy could make dreams of renewable power a reality." He was also featured on 60 Minutes this summer. Maybe you saw him. And Stephen Colbert interviewed Jim Rogers on his notorious Colbert Report this summer. Now, the Colbert lead-in, characteristically understated, referred to him as a major deity and a grand master of the electric field. I don't know if that's a physics reference or what. But in any event, in the electric power industry, James Rogers is rare, an environmentalist who is vocal. He's not an endangered species, but he and his wife, M.A., who is here in the front row, and we welcome her, were surprised earlier this year to find a horde of protesters on their front lawn. While some environmentalists object to Duke Energy's expanding portfolio of coal-generated power, Mr. Rogers has earnestly championed climate change legislation. Indeed, he's credited by some environmentalists with achieving the inclusion of cap and trade provisions in legislation before Congress that would reduce America's CO2 emissions by 70% in 40 years. Perhaps it strikes you as an irony to take up the struggle against carbon loading in the atmosphere and be the CEO of a major coal-burning utility. But it's understandable if you realize that Jim Rogers is tasked with juggling the interests of ratepayers, stockholders, and the environment itself, responsibilities he has to take seriously. His advocacy of tougher regulation of coal burning hasn't endeared him to all his colleagues in the electric power industry, and in 2007, he stunned his board of directors with a plan to decarbonize by 2050. This is a man who has a great deal to say, who's having influence on the future of America's energy portfolio, and is going to make a continuing difference in the lives of all of us through his public policy involvement based on a career wealthy with knowledge of the energy industry. It's my pleasure to introduce James E. Rogers.
Let me start by saying I am delighted to be here this afternoon. I will tell you of the things that David talked about. The one that I had the greatest angst about was the Colbert Report. And the reason I had the greatest angst is because as I met with him before we started the interview, and he started his program. He tapes it at 7 o'clock at night, comes on at 11:30. I actually TiVo it and watch it because there is a great deal of humor, and many people get their news today from the Daily, from Jon Stewart and from Stephen Colbert. But the thing that I remember the most about it, and I don't remember much about the interview actually, because it goes like a flash, but as he walked by the green room on the way to tape it, he looked in and he pointed his finger at me and he goes, "You are now mine." And I have to tell you, the pucker factor went to a whole new level. But that was a tough assignment. I am so delighted to be here tonight. And I want to thank the Schultz family for sponsoring this lecture series. I think it's so important to have conversations about energy and environmental issues because we need a national conversation about these issues. And we need to discuss them. We need to understand them from every perspective. And so I welcome tonight and my hope is that this evolves, because I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and the good news is I have a watch here, I got a clock, so I'll go fast. But what I really want to do is engage the conversation, because I think all knowledge starts with a conversation. I will start with a monologue, but I hope we evolve into a conversation, because what I hope comes out of tonight is a greater understanding and greater knowledge about the way forward in the 21st century. We are, as David said, one of the largest generators of electricity in the country. We're the third largest generator from nuclear power. We're the third largest from coal. And 70% of our electricity comes from coal. We serve 5 states and touch the lives of 11 million people. And I'm going to start by sharing 3 numbers with you to give you a sense of the mission that I'm on. And the 3 numbers are 3, 12, and 41. Of all the companies in the United States, we're the 3rd largest emitter of CO2. Of all the companies in the world, we're the 12th largest emitter of CO2. And if we were one of the 192 countries in the United Nations, we'd be ranked 41st. I'm not applying for country status. But I share those statistics with you to give you a sense of how daunting the challenge is that faces just one company. And it should give you a sense of why I feel like I have a special responsibility because of 31241 to go to work on this issue and to go to work on it now and not only shape the policy, but to come up with the solutions. And so what you're going to hear tonight is a mix of policy and solutions, because I believe that's my responsibility with respect to the 31241. I think it'd be useful for me to start quickly with the idea that let's take a quick look back. And I'd like for us to go 100 years back to 1909, when I was very young. And in 1909, we started on a route in this country of providing universal access to electricity. If you think back about 1909, and I lived in a house that was built before then, you burned coal, you burned wood, you used kerosene, and if you manufactured steel, you used blast furnaces. And if you'd been to the cities in the Midwest, the industrial heartland of our country, or to any of the cities across this country, it was pretty dirty and pretty messy. And over the last 100 years, we have provided universal access to every American. And that's an important statistic. And I'll come back to it why that's important. But not only did we provide universal access, which was our mission in the 20th century, but we did it in an affordable way. And in fact, the real price of electricity is flat for the last 50 years because we built bigger and bigger plants, lower unit cost. We provided it in a reliable way because we provide electricity 99.99% of the time. I don't know about y'all, but I don't perform 99.99% of the time. And then lastly, and this is the part people forget, we really cleaned up the environment by the electrification of America. And then in 1970, you had the Clean Air Act, and we started cleaning up the coal plants we built. And so during this period of time, there was a great transformation that occurred when our mission was to provide universal access. But go back to 1909. Who could have imagined in 1909 that electricity would have enabled refrigeration, air conditioning, fundamentally changing the South and the Southwest and how we live, X-rays, MRIs, other medical devices, computers, the internet, the electrotechnology that we use today to make steel. We couldn't envision those things, but electricity was an enabler for all those developments in the modern life we have today. And I think as I look at the 20th century, I go, that was our mission. We got that job done. But quite frankly, in the 21st century, our mission will be fundamentally different. And that's where the conversation, I think, really starts. But before I go further, I should say that in the 20th century, the National Academy of Engineers said the greatest engineering achievement was the electrification of America. I know that because Neil Armstrong, who served on my board for over a decade, chaired that committee. I had no influence on that decision. Although every time I needed his vote in the boardroom, I started my presentations with one small step. I often got his vote. But the fact of the matter is, it was a great engineering achievement to do what was done in that 100 years. And before I turn to the 21st century, let me tell you how I'm judged, because I've been a CEO for 20 years. I'm judged every day. When a customer throws a switch and the lights come on, they judge whether or not the product is reliable. Every month when they open the bill, they look at it and say, is it affordable? So I'm judging affordability. I'm judged by the communities in terms of whether I'm giving back to the communities and what my environmental footprint is. I'm judged by investors every quarter and every year. Am I growing earnings and paying a good dividend? But I think the toughest judgment that I have, and I haven't passed the test yet, is how I address climate change and global warming and 3-12-41. I call this the grandchildren's test, and I have 8 of them. And when they're my age, I hope they look back and say, my granddaddy made good decisions and they're still good today because he helped his company and our country and the world get on the road to reducing the carbon footprint of the entire planet. And he went about it in a realistic way, recognizing that job one for him is to provide affordable, reliable, clean electricity 24/7, 365 days a year. And they were able to make the transition in a way that didn't destroy the economy, but actually created jobs and made a stronger economy. I just signed up for 5 more years as CEO. And my wife kind of looked at me and said, what in the hell were you thinking? And what I'm thinking is this. I believe, and that's why I'm glad you're here, I believe that what's going to happen in the next 5 years, maybe it'll be 10, but I'll make it 5. But in the next 5 years is going to fundamentally transform what happens with energy and environmental policy in our country for the remainder of this century and how we address those issues. And let me tell you what the 2 aspirations I have for our company and for our country. The first aspiration is to modernize and decarbonize the generation supply of our country. For me, that's easy to conceptualize because I know by 2050, virtually every power plant I operate today will be retired and replaced. Think about how liberating that is to know that I have a clean sheet of paper. And that if the mission is low carbon generation, I can get that done. Because I'm going to have to retire and replace anyway. Why not do it in a way that allows us to cross the bridge to a low carbon world? So that's an aspiration I have for our country and for our company. The second aspiration that I have is to make the communities we serve the most energy efficient in the world. And by the way, I believe that whether carbon is considered an issue or not. And the reason I believe that so strongly is I know today there are 1.6 billion people in the world who do not have access to electricity. They do not have access to the modern world. Think about the future of their children and grandchildren. And so over the next several decades, we've got to find a way to provide electricity to the 1.6 billion. But think about it in another way. We have 6.5 billion people on the planet today, and by 2050, we'll have 9 billion. And think how much electricity it's going to take if they maintain the same standard of living that we have in this country. And they all aspire, the 1.6 that don't have it today and the 3+ that are coming, aspire to have a standard of living very similar to the one that we have in this country. And the fact of the matter is, think about what the demand is for electricity. And if we don't get this carbon issue right and get the generation fleet right, we're only going to exacerbate the problem. I actually believe the most energy, think about the battle over scarce resources that will come as a consequence of that demographic statistic. And so I believe that we have a higher probability of having a higher standard of living for our children and our grandchildren if we become the most energy efficient economy in the world. and we need to get about the business of doing that. And that's why I'm such an advocate for energy efficiency, and I believe that is part of our role going forward. One of the things that we have done, and I'll come back to this and talk more about it in a moment, we recently entered into an MOU with the largest generator of electricity in China. One, because we think the Chinese will probably scale CCS faster than we will in the US. And if coal, which we have a 200-year supply, is going to be used in the future, we got to find a way to take the carbon out. And we got to figure it out pretty fast, or we got to start switching to other options if we're going to meet the targets set by Waxman Markey. And one of the reasons, and you're going to see several other MOUs, because what I know is this: China leads the world in solar panel production. I'm on the board of Applied Materials, which is in the business of building factory lines to build thin film solar panels. They lead the world in the development of wind turbines. They lead the world in battery. They are building 14 nuclear plants. They're doing CCS. They're operating on and they're building new cities of 3 to 5 million people, and they're going to take smart grid ideas that we're trying, and y'all are trying, and Excel's doing a terrific job with their effort here in Boulder. We're doing similar things in our part of the country. But the fact of the matter is they will scale this technology faster than we can ever imagine it, because they do things on China time. And quite frankly, one of the questions that I ask, and I spend a lot of time inside the Beltway, are we becoming like our European ancestors, the chattering class on these issues? Or are we going to be like the Chinese and be the can-do class? Because the truth of the matter is, we need a can-do type mentality. That's what's made our country what it is today. And I feel like by allying with the Chinese, I don't see them as a threat. I see cooperation between China and the United States key to solving energy and environmental problems in the future. And we can have a conversation about that in a moment, but I want to put it out there for you to think about. I also believe without a plan to execute aspirations like decarbonization and making our communities the most energy efficient are only good intentions, and a strategy is only a good idea unless you have the passion to execute on it. And that is really key. You got to have a passion to execute on it. And secondly, you've got to have the agility to change directions as the future changes and new technologies come. There have been many discontinuities over the last 100 years, and I suspect there'll be more discontinuities, and we have to build in the optionality in our planning that allows us to shift gears as technology evolves, as the cost equation evolves going forward. As y'all know, there's 5 ways to generate electricity, and each of them has pluses and minuses. And quite frankly, it's too early to take any of them off the table at this juncture. Each needs technological advances to be an equal contributor in a low-carbon world. And I underscore equal contributor because it's all about supply and power 24/7. Because that's what our customers want. That's how our economy runs. All are needed if we're going to achieve affordable, reliable, clean electricity. And the toughest decisions that I make, and as a country we will make, is the ability to balance affordability, reliability, and clean. And let me tell you, and I'm going to be blunt, I don't have the luxury, as consumer advocates do, of looking through the lens of just affordability. And with my environmental friends, I don't have the luxury of looking through the clean lens and forgetting about reliability and affordability. I have to look through all those lenses and try to find a way forward that keeps power affordable, reliable, and increasingly clean over time. And one of the reasons allying with China, in my judgment, for us is critical is because they have the same mindset. It's been pretty convenient for a lot of politicians to blame the Chinese as to why we shouldn't do anything. I believe that we ought to develop a ladder of cooperation between Chinese companies, U.S. companies, and it needs to be built rung by rung, whether it's on solar or wind or battery or nuclear or gas. We need to find a way, because they in all likelihood will scale the technologies that we need in the future faster than we will be able to do it here in the United States. We need them, they need us, and we need to find a way to work together. Let me quickly tell you what we are doing as a company to build a bridge to a low-carbon world. And this is where I get in a lot of trouble, because I've testified before Congress in support of cap and trade. I'm an outspoken advocate for regulating carbon, but I'm building 2 coal plants. And most people, y'all might be very polite, and some of you might not, say, well, Roger, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. Why would anybody be building a coal plant who believes you need to regulate carbon until there's a way to capture carbon from the use of coal? Let me share with you what we're doing and why. We're building 2 coal plants, the equivalent of about 1,400 megawatts. One of the coal plants is in Indiana. It's in the coal fields. It's coal gasification. It will have the lowest SOx, NOx, and mercury footprint of any coal plant in the United States. And we're going to do CCS at the site, and it will be the largest CCS project in the United States. And the reason that we entered into the MOU with Huaneng Group in China is because they're doing the same thing with their project they call Green Tech. We call our project NowGen. We've heard about FutureGen, and I'll be delighted to talk about that. But we're doing NowGen, and the Chinese are doing GreenGen. And the reality is there's a lot we can learn together. The other thing is that we're building a plant in North Carolina. It doesn't have the same geology, but here's the reality. We're building 1,400 megawatts of new coal, and we're going to shut down over 1,500 megawatts of 60 to 70-year-old plants. So our SOx, NOx, mercury footprint is going to go from here to here. The carbon intensity of our product is going to improve, and we're experimenting with a technology. I mean, we're spending $2.3 billion on coal gas. It'll be the largest coal gas plant in the world. And we're putting our money where our mouth is and saying, look, we're not waiting for the government to do FutureGen, canceled in the last administration, resurrected in this administration, and is going nowhere, because they're not really focused on that part of it that needs to be focused, and that is capturing the carbon from the burning of coal. So we're building 2 coal plants. We also have 2 nuclear plants on the drawing board, because today nuclear is the only technology that you can provide electricity 24/7 with 0 greenhouse gases. And actually we can have a conversation about waste management. What is the tougher assignment in the future? To measure carbon, or to manage carbon underground, or to manage spent fuel from nuclear? And let me just give you one stat on geography, and I can talk to you about time, but to trigger questions, I can take all the spent fuel from, and we produce 20% of our electricity from nuclear in the US, twice the amount the French do, by the way. We lead the world in this area. And you could take all that spent fuel today and put it on one football field 7 feet high. If I'm looking at taking 20% of an 800 megawatt coal plant and putting it underground, and our people project it'll take 100 square miles to store the carbon from that. So just from the geography of storing carbon underground. I used to be in the gas business and did gas storage. I remember migration and all those kind of issues. And I've been in the business of enhanced oil recovery, and you got leakage and seepage and blah, blah, blah. So I think we've got some challenges. And so don't automatically rule nuclear out, because if you think of it in terms of a long-term waste management issue, it might prove to be a lot easier for us to manage than CCS. Open question, but I think it's one worth discussing. But another reason why you can't take nuclear off the table. The third way you really generate electricity is with renewables, and we're doing three things there. We've invested $1 billion in wind. In the last several years, we actually are building the Kit Carson project we just announced in eastern Colorado. And we have over 5,000 megawatts under development in 14 states. We're the 10th largest operator of wind in the United States. And we had no wind 3 years ago. That's how fast we moved in that direction. We have a program in North Carolina what we call solar on the rooftop, where we're basically investing in solar, installing it, giving a lease payment, because we view the rooftop as like a power plant site, so that we will install it, operate it, manage it, because I believe in the next 20 years, we will find that solar is a better solution than wind, because it's a distributed generation. And at the end of the day, when you look at the cost, and the cost of transmission to get wind from where it is to where the load is, and you do the math, at the end of the day, solar is going to be more of a key to the future than wind, even though we're making significant investments in both. And then lastly, we're doing a joint venture with Areva in France to build biomass plants in the US. So we're focused on renewables. I talked to you about smart grid, and I'll get into detail about that, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about it, because it's really a key, and this is the takeaway point on smart grid. We built an analog system in the 20th century that gave 99.99% reliability. We built in a lot of redundancy. What the digital system is going to allow us to do, and by the way, we don't know when we have an outage until somebody calls us. And effectively what we will be able to do with the digital grid is we will be able to do two-way communication throughout our grid, and we've already found situations where we knew from the data that was coming back to us that we were soon going to have a capacitor problem. We were able to fix it and avoid an outage. So there's a healing or self-healing aspect of this. It's going to reduce our O&M cost in terms of connect and disconnect. I mean, in a university town like this, the ability to do the connect and disconnect without putting people in a truck to drive to the house to do that. I mean, think of the savings there just from a carbon standpoint in terms of being able to do it remotely. So I believe the smart grid is key. And it's not just the smart meter. And now I'm going to give you the provocative point. I have the belief that for energy efficiency to really work in this country, it's got to be back of mind in the same way electricity is back of mind when you throw the switch. To put a list of 15 things on your refrigerator, where most families, the husband and wife, are both working, to do those 15 things to make sure you use energy efficiently that day, that's not going to get done. We need to use technology. We need to write software where it meets the comfort and convenience of the families and the businesses. And it's the writing of that software, understanding the algorithms within the home. And we have an experiment now that we're doing where when the dishwasher comes on, there's sort of I'm a lawyer by training, so I'm going to get way beyond my capability here, but the refrigerator kind of, the way it operates sort of kind of comes down in their use of electricity and allows us, and we've done this with our customers in this area, and we've been able to reduce their usage 10%, and they not even know any difference in the quality of the service. And it was all done with technology and sensing devices and communications from device to device and no human interaction. It just did it. And I think that is the vision that I have. And that's the part. The smart grid is going to be the enabler, the way electricity was an enabler. And I stand here today and tell you, I can't envision what will be enabled as a consequence of the smart grid in terms of our use of energy. And I believe that we in the utility business have the ability, because we have a lower cost of capital and relationship with customers, to really bring universal access to energy efficiency in the 21st century in the same way we brought universal access to electricity. I believe the business model and the regulatory models ought to be changed so we're incented to spend $1 on energy efficiency in the same way we're incented to spend $1 building a power plant. And if I had a choice, I'd spend it on energy efficiency because I know I have a zero environmental footprint as a consequence of that investment. But we need the regulatory model changed so we're incented to do that, because when you're doing universal access, you're incented to build power plants and extend lines. And with these other aspirations of the 21st century, we need the models to incent us to do a different way. So I'm a strong believer in energy efficiency as one of the keys. I call it the fifth fuel, and I've been criticized. I felt lucky when I called it the fifth fuel to get it on the list. Natural gas is on the list, and I should talk about that because we're building 2 natural gas plants. And you go, 2 natural gas plants, 2 nuclear plants, 2 coal plants. Are you NOAA? Is there an ark someplace? But my point is that we are spending our money in every option to generate electricity and trying to advance the technology in each area. Let me quickly turn and talk, before I open it up to questions, about the legislation that's pending in Congress. And I'm not talking health care. I just barely know a little bit about the power business. I'm delighted that the House was able to move as fast as they did with the Waxman-Markey bill. It's not perfect. It's better than I expected it would be, but it adopted a cap and trade approach where you put a cap on emissions and they decline over time. It's going to allow a price on carbon, so when we make investments 5 years out, 15 years out, 100 years out, and by the way, when we build power plants, they're for 50 years, a price on carbon. And what it's really going to do is going to really allow us to build a regulatory regime that allows us to cross the bridge. And the fact of the matter is, and I think this is an important fact, I've been focused a lot on the transition. Sure, I buy into the timeline and targets, but I only buy into them because of the transition, and the transition to me is all about the allocation of allowances. That's because I started my career, early in my career, I was a consumer advocate, and when I testify before Congress now, I'm still a consumer advocate because I don't want to see 40 and 50% price increases to my customers if we went to an auction system or we cap and dividend or what all these other sort of ideas. So what the House did was a very sensible thing. What's scary about the House bill is if you change 4 votes, it would not have passed. And that's very scary for a guy that's getting ready to spend $10 billion on a nuclear plant or $2 billion on this or $2 billion on that, because I need certainty. And if there's only a 4-vote swing, is our country really committed to going to the low-carbon world? And my belief is, go back to every major piece of environmental legislation in our country, back to the Clean Air Act of 1970, they've been overwhelmingly bipartisan. And this bill wasn't. And I think we're in a place where it's so polarized in Washington, it's not clear to me how it evolves in the Senate. Here's an important statistic. There are three important statistics. The Waxman-Markey bill, 25% of the votes for that bill came from two states, California and New York. They only have 4% of the vote in the Senate. So by definition, the bill is going to move even more to the center, whatever that means, and we all have meanings of center. It is going to have to, it will probably pay more attention to the cost implications because, and that's the other statistic, there are 25 states in this country where more than 50% of the electricity comes from coal. Do the math in the Senate. And the key to the Senate is 15 to 17 moderate Democrats who are from these coal-producing states. And if you could join with them 7 to 10 moderate Republicans, I believe you can find a way to go forward, but it's going to require that kind of moderation to get it out of the Senate. Plus, it's far more complicated in the Senate because of the different committees. I'm a guy that wanted the bill passed this year. And you go, well, why this year? I think we have a better chance of getting a bill that works in the middle of a recession where issues of the economy are kind of viewed in the same way of the issues of the theology, and there is certain theology around climate, and that maybe we can start down this road in a way that doesn't undermine the competitiveness of our country and take economic factors into account, but nonetheless get us across this bridge, because I want to cross the bridge. But I don't believe it's going to happen this year. I believe the conventional wisdom says it's going to happen in the first half of next year. And having spent 9 to 10 years in Washington as a lawyer, I will tell you if it doesn't get done by June of 10, it won't get done to 11, because it's an election cycle. So that's what we're looking at in terms of timing. And let me say this. This transition to a low-carbon world is not going to be free. Prices are going to go up. And we need to be honest with the American people. They're going to go up more in some areas than other areas. They're going to go up more in Colorado, because 75% of electricity comes from coal, than they are going to go up in California. They're going to go up in Indiana, where we're the largest utility, where 95% of electricity comes from coal. They won't go up as much in North Carolina because 50% of electricity comes from nuclear and 50% comes from coal. So this transition is not going to be free. And it's going to have a disproportionate impact on people all around the country. It's not going to be easy, because we really need to develop new technologies that need to be scaled. And that's going to take hard work. And that's where our alliance with China, I think, will make a difference in the speed of deployment and scalability. Thirdly, it's not going to be quick. I mean, it took us a long time to get to where we are, and it's going to take not 1 year or 5 years, it's going to take several decades or more to make the transition in a way that allows us to do this in an affordable, reliable, increasingly clean way. But most importantly, to me, this transition has got to be fair, it's got to be affordable, and maybe the most important point is we have to get started now. And kicking the can down the road, as the president said last night, in the terms of health care, is just not a good answer with climate. So I'd like to see it done this year or the first half of next year. I think we make a huge mistake if we wait to 11, because the dynamics of the world would change a lot, and this is a worldwide problem. And unfortunately, we're going to go to Copenhagen with not much to contribute. And so I've worked hard to try to make that a reality, but I don't think that's going to happen in Copenhagen. And quite frankly, I don't believe doing nothing is an option, because the Supreme Court has spoken and given EPA the authority to regulate, and the reality is that will be very costly. It will be command and control, and at the end of the day, it'll be litigated for 5 to 7 years. And at the end of the day, it won't involve any energy policy, it'll be all environmental policy. What we need is energy and environmental policy, because they're inextricably linked, and you can't do one without the other. And that's why Congress has got to step up and do their job on this issue. My last thought. It's a personal story, but I think it makes a point. And I'm looking at my wife and trying to decide how much of it I tell. She's a good gauge. But when I turned 50, actually my birthday's September the 20th, and my daughter was due right around that date with my first, well, they're the type that wanted to know, it's our first granddaughter. And she went into labor on the 19th of September. And she lived in Texas, and I lived in the Midwest. And I called her up, and I said, Chrissy, good luck. And she'd been in labor for a while, and I was cheering for her. I said, you know, it'd be worth a lot to that girl if you could just wait till tomorrow morning. And so I flew to Texas. I got there at 10 o'clock at night. She'd already had the baby. So I went in, and I'm a good dad, and I said to her, I said, congratulations. She looked like, she was exhausted. And I said, congratulations. But knowing that she's the oldest daughter, and you know how oldest daughters like to please their dads, I said, I thought we had a deal. And she kind of looked at me and she said, well, first of all, Dad, I have no control over this. Secondly, the more I thought about this, the more I wanted her to have her own birthday. But on London time, she was born on your birthday. Pleasing daughter. I said without thinking, well, when that girl turns 10 and I'm 60, we'll go to London and celebrate it on the same day. And Emma and I took Emma to London, and we celebrated it on the same day. But she'd been to London, and we're the type of grandparents that like to do the first thing. And the fact that we were taking her for the second time was okay, but, we have our egos as grandparents. So we put her on the channel and took her to Paris, where she had never been. But the point is we went to Notre Dame. It was built over 104 years. It took 3 generations to build that. The architect who actually designed it never saw it finished. The people that worked on the foundation never saw the stained glass windows. The people that worked on the walls and the stained glass windows all their lives, because it took 3 to 4 generations, never saw it finished, never saw the spirals. But what they had was what I call cathedral thinking. They had the ability to have a vision. They committed 3 generations of their lives knowing the early generations that it'd never be finished, but they worked all their lives on it because they had a vision, they had faith, and they committed their lives to it. We need cathedral thinking on the climate issue. But quite frankly, we need to do it on China time. Thank y'all very much.